Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial as reported by Inner City Press. If this shocking phone call revelation leaves us stunned, does it left that courtroom? Smash that like button and subscribe for the explosive celebrity court coverage that mainstream media refuses to show you. Nobody expected Judge Sarah Chen to suddenly reach for the audio equipment at 2:47 p.m. today. The courtroom was tense. Prosecutors had been methodically presenting evidence until the judge made an unprecedented decision. Gasps echoed through the air. Laurie, even seasoned court reporters froze. No warning, no preparation, just Judge Chen announcing she was about to play or recorded phone call that would change everything. Until that moment, Diddy had maintained his composed demeanor throughout the trial. He'd sat confidently at the defense table, whispering strategies with his high-powered legal team. I'm projecting the image of a man wrongfully accused, but something had changed. Maybe it was the mounting evidence against him. Maybe it was the realization that his own words were about to betray him. Maybe it was the knowledge that this phone call contained his most damaging admissions. Whatever it was, Sean Combs was about to hear his own voice destroy his defense. He wasn't sitting there as a music mogul anymore. He was there as a defendant whose private conversations were about to become public evidence. And when that audio began to play, the courtroom wasn't prepared for what they would hear, because what Judge Chen was about to reveal through Diddy's own recorded work, it wasn't just incriminating evidence, it was a confession that would expose the full scope of his criminal enterprise and prove that his public denials had been elaborate lies. What could be so damaging in a phone call that it would make a federal judge stop the entire trial to play it immediately? What did he say in what he thought was a private conversation that would leave his own lawyers speechless? And why was this recording being revealed now at the most crucial moment of his trial? The answers would prove that sometimes the most powerful evidence comes from a defendant's own mouth, and Sean Combs was about to learn that in the digital age no conversation is ever truly private. The Manhattan Federal Courthouse had seen its share of dramatic moments during the Diddy trial, but nothing had prepared anyone for what was about to unfold. And Courtroom 318, for 3 weeks, prosecutors had been building their case, methodically presenting witness after witness, document after document, painting a picture of systematic criminal behavior spanning decades. Judge Sarah Chen, known for her no-nonsense approach and strict courtroom management, had been presiding with her usual professional demeanor. At 58, she was one of the most respected federal judges in the Southern District of New York, with a reputation for fairness and an unwavering commitment to justice. But at exactly 2:47 p.m. on this Tuesday afternoon, something shifted in her expression. She had been reviewing a sealed motion from the prosecution when she suddenly looked up, her eyes moving from a defense table to the prosecution team, then to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, judge, and announced, her voice carrying an unusual weight, I have just reviewed evidence that requires immediate presentation to this court. The prosecution has submitted a recorded phone conversation that I believe is crucial for the jury to hear. The courtroom atmosphere immediately changed. Deniers' defense team, led by high-profile attorney Mark Agnes, Hello exchanged worried glances. They had fought fiercely to keep certain recorded conversations from being admitted as evidence, claiming violations of attorney-client privilege as an improper surveillance. Did he himself, who had been calmly taking notes on a yellow legal pad, suddenly went rigid. His pen stopped moving. His breathing became visibly shallow. For the first time since the trial began, Sean Combs looked genuinely afraid. Your Honor, Agnello stood quickly. We request an immediate sidebar to discuss the admissibility of any recordings that haven't been properly authenticated through our discovery process. Judge Chen's response was swift and decisive. Counselor, this recording was obtained through a court-authorized wiretap As part of an ongoing federal investigation, it has been properly authenticated by the FBI Technical Analysis Unit, and its relevance to this case is undeniable. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Rodriguez, remains seated, but alert. They had been waiting for this moment, knowing that this particular recording contained what many consider the smoking gun of their entire case. The court will now play a phone conversation recorded on March 15, 2024 between their defense and Sean Combs and an individual identified, and the transcript, as Associate Judge Chen announced. This conversation was recorded pursuant to Federal Wiretap Authorization Case number 24C/2847. The technical staff moved quickly to set up the audio equipment. The courtroom state-of-the-art and system would ensure that every word would be crystal clear, every pause audible, every incriminating statement preserved for the jury and court record. As the technicians made their final adjustments, you could hear a pin drop in the gallery. Reporters sat poised with their pens. Sketch artists prepared their materials, and Diddy sat frozen, knowing that his own words were about to seal his fate. The red light on the recording equipment flickered on, and Judge Chen nodded to the technician. "Please begin playback," she instructed, and the courtroom held its collective breath to understand the devastating impact of this phone call. You need to know how federal investigators first became aware of Sean Combs' criminal activists, and why they decided to place him under surveillance. The investigation began in late 2022 when Cassie Ventura filed her civil lawsuit against Diddy, alleging years of abuse, forced participation in sexual encounters, and systematic manipulation. While civil lawsuits don't automatically trigger federal criminal investigations, the specific allegations in Cassie a complaint raised red flags with federal prosecutors. The initial complaint contained allegations that suggested potential federal crimes, explained former federal prosecutor Sarah Johnson in a later interview. Racketeering, human trafficking, interstate transportation for illegal purposes. These are serious federal offenses that demanded investigation. Within weeks of Cassie filing, the FBI Organized Crime Task Force opened a preliminary investigation into Sean Combs and his business enterprises. What they discovered was far more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. The investigation revealed a complex network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and business relationships that appeared designed to facilitate and conceal criminal activity. More troubling were the patterns that emerged from financial records, regular payments to young women who had attended Diddy's parties, suspicious medical expenses that couldn't be explained by normal entertainment industry activities, and large cash transactions that seemed designed to avoid federal reporting requirements. By early 2023, investigators had enough evidence to convince a judge to authorize limited surveillance of Diddy's communications. The wiretap application, later unsealed as part of court proceedings, outlined a pattern of behavior that suggested ongoing criminal activity. The subject has demonstrated a consistent pattern of using his position in the entertainment industry to exploit vulnerable individuals. The FBI's application stated financial records and witness statements suggest this activity is ongoing and poses continued risk to potential victims. The wiretap authorization was initially limited to Diddy's business phone lines and covered a 90-day period, but what investigators heard during those first 3 months was so incriminating, and that they successfully applied for extensions that lasted nearly a year. The phone call the Judge Chen was about to play was recorded during the final extension period in March 2024, just weeks before Diddy's eventual arrest. By that time, federal investigators had collected hundreds of hours of recorded conversations, many of which contained admissions of criminal activity. But this particular call was different. While other recordings had captured Diddy discussing suspicious activities in coded language or making vague references to potentially illegal behavior, this conversation was explicit, detailed, and undeniably incriminating. The call took place on March 15, 2024 at 11:47 p.m. Diddy was calling from his Miami mansion to an individual federal investigators had identified as Jonathan Martinez, a longtime associate who managed many of Diddy's personal affairs and had been present at numerous parties over the years. What made this call particularly damaging was the context in which had occurred. Just hours earlier, federal agents had raided to have Diddy's properties, his homes in Los Angeles and Miami, as part of their ongoing investigation. The raids had been conducted simultaneously and had yielded significant evidence, including computers, phones, recording equipment, and documents. Diddy's phone call to Martinez came just after the raids concluded. He was calling from afar on that hadn't been seized during the search, apparently believing his conversation would remain private. What he didn't know was that federal investigators had been monitoring this backup phone line for weeks. Sean was clearly rattled by the raids. He explained to law enforcement source familiar with the investigation he had managed to maintain control over his narrative for months, but the federal search warrant showed him that investigators were serious and had significant evidence. The timing of the call was crucial for another reason. Under federal wiretap laws, conversations between defendants and their attorneys are protected by privilege and cannot be used as evidence. But this call was to an associate, not a lawyer, which meant everything Diddy said could potentially be used against him in court. During the weeks leading up to this phone call, Diddy had been working frantically behind the scenes to contain the damage from a federal investigation. He had hired crisis management specialists, retained additional legal counsel, and reached out to former associates in an apparent attempt to coordinate their responses to potential inquiries. But the pressure of the federal investigation had clearly taken its toll. Associates described Diddy as increasingly paranoid and erratic. In the weeks before his arrest, he had cancelled public appearances, avoided his usual social circles, and seemed obsessed with monitoring news coverage of the investigation. This phone call captured Diddy at his most vulnerable moment, immediately after federal agents had searched his home, seized his property, and demonstrated that they had enough evidence to obtain multiple search warrants. As the audio equipment crackled to life, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Judge Chin had provided transcripts to the jury, but hearing Diddy's actual voice would make the evidence far more powerful and personal. The recording began with the sound of a phone ringing, followed by a familiar voice. "Jonathan, it's me." Diddy's voice came through the speakers, immediately recognizable despite the stress and exhaustion evident in his tone. "They just left. The feds just finished searching both houses." The voice is in the courtroom. Several jurors leaned forward in their seats. This was the first time they were hearing Diddy acknowledge anything about parties beyond normal social gatherings. What exactly did they take from the basement? The courtroom erupted in whispers before Judge Chen gavelled for silence. This was the first explicit admission that Diddy had been systematically recording activities at his parties for 2 decades. "The girls are going to talk," Diddy continued, seemingly oblivious to how incriminating his words were. "Cassie already started, and once the feds offer immunity deals, they're all going to come forward. We need to get ahead of this." "Sean, stop." Martinez interrupted. "You're saying too much. It's too late for that." Diddy snapped back. "They have video evidence of everything: the parties, the coercion, the drugs were used to keep people compliant. They have footage of celebrities, politicians, business executives, people who'll do anything to keep their reputations intact." At the defense table, Diddy's lawyers looked devastated. One was frantically writing notes, while another appeared to be calculating how much damage control would be possible after this revelation. "What about the payments?" Martinez asked. "The monthly transfers to keep people quiet. They seized those records." Diddy replied, "Bank statements going back 15 years showing payments to dozens of people. The federal accountants will be able to trace every dollar we paid to maintain silence." The recording continued with increasingly damaging admissions. did he describe specific criminal activities in detail, named other participants in his schemes, and outlined the systematic nature of his operation? You remember that young actress from 2019. Did he ask the one who overdosed at the Miami party? They have footage of that night, Jonathan. They have her on camera before and after if that comes out. Don't say another word about that, Martinez replied urgently. That's manslaughter at minimum. But did he seem unable to stop himself? The stress of the federal raids had apparently broken down his usual careful control over his communications. We had a system. He continued to recruit them, get them to. Didn't on the lifestyle record everything, then use the recordings to ensure compliance. It worked for 20 years because everyone had too much to lose. And now Martinez asked, no, they're offering immunity deals. Diddy said bitterly, the feds are telling people they can walk away clean if they testify. Against me, all those years of mutual assured destruction, and it only works if everyone stays committed to silence. The most damaging part of the recording came when Diddy began discussing specific criminal acts. They have footage from the tunnel system. He said, remember how we used to bring people in through the underground entrance so they couldn't be seen arriving? They found all of that. They're hidden cameras, the two-way mirrors, the restraint equipment. Several jurors appeared visibly disturbed by these revelations. One juror put her hand to her mouth in apparent shock. What about the international connections? Martinez asked. The parties in the Caribbean and Europe, those two. Diddy replied, they've been coordinating with international law enforcement. The private island, the yacht parties, the trips where we transported people across state lines and international borders for legal purposes. It's all documented. The recording revealed the scope of what appeared to be a massive criminal enterprise that operated across multiple jurisdictions and involved hundreds of victims over 2 decades. I never thought they'd be able to piece it all together, Diddy admitted. We kept everything compartmentalized, used different companies for different operations, paid people through various channels. But they had wiretaps, Jonathan. They've been listening to our conversations 4 months. How long do you think we have before arrest? Martinez asked. Not long, Diddy replied. My lawyers think maybe a few weeks. At most, they're building cases against everyone involved. The recruiters, the hands. There's the people who helped maintain the properties, everyone who took payments to stay quiet. The call concluded with Diddy making perhaps his most incriminating statement. 20 years of controlling Hollywood's biggest names through blackmail and coercion. He said 20 years of having enough dirt on politicians and business leaders to operate with impunity, and it's all to come crashing down because one victim finally found the courage to speak up. As the recording ended, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Judge Chin turned off the audio equipment and looked at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the playback of the recorded conversation. The transcript has been admitted as evidence. Item 47. Diddy sat motionless at the defense table, his face pale and his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His own words had just destroyed any hope of maintaining his innocence following the devastating phone call revelation. Prosecutor Emily Rodriguez stood to address the jury, using Diddy's own admissions to outline the systematic nature of his criminal enterprise. Arise, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Rodriguez began. You've just heard the defendant describe in his own words what federal investigators discovered through months of careful investigation. This wasn't random criminal behavior. This was a sophisticated long-term operation designed to exploit vulnerable people and maintain control through blackmail and coercion. She walked toward a large display board that had been set up during the audio playback, containing a timeline that stretched from 2002 to 2024. The defendant admitted to maintaining what he called insurance policies for 20 years. Rodriguez continued, these weren't business insurance policies. These were recordings of powerful people in compromising situations designed to ensure their silence and complicity in his criminal activities. The pattern that emerged from Diddy's phone call admissions was chilling in its organization and scope. He had described a multi-layered operation that included recruitment documentation, coercion, and long-term control of victims and witnesses. The defendant spoke about recruiting people young and getting them dependent on the lifestyle. Rodriguez explained, "This describes a classic pattern of human trafficking targeting vulnerable individuals, providing them with luxury and access to exclusive events, then gradually introducing them to illegal activities while documenting their participation." The recording had revealed several key components of Diddy's operation. The recruitment system. Diddy admitted to targeting young people seeking to break into the entertainment industry. These individuals were initially invited to legitimate industry events, then gradually introduced to more exclusive and ultimately illegal activities. The documentation had worked the admission about to recording equipment and cameras revealed that Diddy had been systematically documenting illegal activities for 2 decades. This wasn't random surveillance, it was strategic collection of compromising material. The payment structure. Dinier's discussion of monthly transfers to keep people quiet and payments to maintain silence showed that he had created a formal system for buying compliance from victims and witnesses. The geographic scope, references to international connections, private islands, and transporting people across state lines demonstrated that this was a multi-jurisdictional